So here's the deal. Did you know that if you invested $10,000 in Apple when it first came out, you would now have $1.6 million? I know. Did you know that if you invested $10,000 when Amazon first came out, you'd have $2.2 million? You follow me? We're going in this direction, people. Did you know that just in 2010, when Tesla opened up, in 2010, if you invested $10,000 in Tesla, in 2010, 13 years later, you'd have $2.9 million. And of course, the big one of them all, if you invested $10,000 in Microsoft, when it first came out, you would now have $9 million, right? I give you 10,000, you give me 9 million back. That's how that would have worked. Now, here's the deal. I want you to imagine something. And here's the deal. Most of us have imagined this very scenario, so it won't be hard. Imagine you could go back in time and you could talk to yourself about the information I just gave you, right? Here's my question to you. What would you tell yourself, right? Because we've all imagined this in our dreams. So you go back in time, right? What's the first thing you would say? Well, the first thing you would say is, okay, don't freak out. I'm you. You're younger than me. I'm older than you. Time travel, it's a timey-wimey thing. I'm here. Okay, get over it. I see you peed your pants. It's okay. Next, listen to me. Listen, right? So the next thing you would say is, here is 4 stocks that I'm going to give you, and you explain exactly what I just explained to you. If you give them $10,000, then they give you $9 million. So you give them the right, and then the third thing you would say is simply this. What I'm telling you, I know this is weird, and I know this information, you don't even know what Microsoft is yet, but here's the deal. What I'm telling you, because I know what's going to happen, this is the only logical thing to do. This is the only reasonable thing to do. So listen, I need you to sell the house. I need you to sell the car. I need you to sell the kids. I need you to sell, right? Because you would say, listen, I told you 10,000. If you would invest if you could scrape together $100,000, then you, me, us, in the future would have $900 million. This is the only logical thing to do. This is the only rational, reasonable thing to do. And the reason that I bring this up is we're on a series called Worship Is. And the title of today's passage is Reasonable and Logical Worship. Everyone say that with me. Reasonable and logical worship. I'm going to show you that here in these 2 verses. So in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, Paul opens up with these words. Therefore, in view of God's what? Mercies. Let me ask you, I hope a church this size has an answer to this question, right? What are some of God's mercies? What are some of the things that God has done for us? Let me know. What have they done? Forgive. Woke me up. What else? Peace. What else? Joy. What else? Life. What else? Salvation. What else? Right. I mean, he says therefore, and when the therefore is therefore, they told me in seminary, if there's a therefore, you're supposed to ask what therefore is therefore. Then therefore is because there's a Romans chapter 1 through 11 before Romans chapter 12. I learned that in seminary as well. Right. And they tell you, so I look back, and what 1 through 11 says is that God loves us, and God seeks us, and God saves us, and God forgives us, and God pursues us, and God has adopted us, and God has adored us, and He never leaves us, and He never forsakes us. And if you look at the end of the book, the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it says God will restore us. God will redeem us. God will resurrect us. God will protect us. God will reward us, right? These are God's mercies. So therefore, in view of God's mercies, Paul urges us to offer something. Everyone say urge. You see, urge, this is going to shock you, but urge is not command. And offer is not you have to. Before we even get into this, you need to see something. You need to know something, and that's this. God will let you walk away from what you should be running towards. Y'all remember the rich young ruler? The rich young ruler is standing in front of Jesus, like standing in front of Jesus. And he says to Jesus, hey, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells him, and he walks away. Right? The prodigal son. Think about the prodigal son parable, right? The prodigal son is standing in front of the Father, which represents God the Father. He's standing in front of the Father who represents wholeness, the Father who represents identity, the Father who represents provision, the Father who represents love. And he looks at him and he goes, give me my stuff, and he walks away. Think about, and we know this, but think about the crowds. So Jesus fed 5,000, Jesus fed 4,000, he preached on the Sermon on the Mount, he did all of it, right? And so when he preached, when we imagine when he preached, it was much different than what actually happened when he preached. Because imagine with me, let me just show you. Let me just show you. Imagine with me that Bishop makes a phone call, because when Bishop makes a phone call, things happen. So, right, so Bishop makes a phone call, and he books Jesus Christ to preach at Grace United next week, right? So next week, Jesus of Nazareth is going to be the speaker, right? And so we would get it out. We would do a television thing. We'd get on the radio. We'd be like, Jesus is gonna be here, right? And then we'd have those doors open. We would have people we would have to just project sound all over, because there'd be so many people here, and the worship team would get up, and then they'd lead the song, all right, and then Bishop would get up and he goes, this next guy, you might have heard of him before, right? And, and then Jesus would come up and he would preach, and he'd be like, and we imagine would happen is that Jesus of Nazareth would preach at Grace United, and at the end of the service, everybody that was here would be, we're totally in, we're going to follow you to our dying day. Only that's not what ever happened when Jesus preached. When Jesus preached, almost everybody left, to where Jesus went to his disciples and said, everybody else left. Will you leave me too? Of course they said, well, where would we go, right? We already gave up our boat gig, so where are we going to go? So here's the truth. Now, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to bring you up at the end. I'm going to tell you the truth, though, okay? So, because I'm supposed to do both, truth and grace, right? That's my job as a pastor, I say. So here's the truth. It's a hard truth. Most of us will walk away from Jesus. Jesus says, small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life. And only how many? A few will find it. Most of us will walk away from Jesus. The question is, why will most of us walk away from Jesus? And the answer is because of the cost. Everyone say the cost. Now here's the cost. He says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, so therefore I urge you, my brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercies, which we just talked about, which are amazing, like universe-changing mercies, to offer your bodies as a what? Living sacrifice. All right, we'll get back to living sacrifice. I need to lay down a foundational truth first. Foundational truth is this. Everybody worships, and worship costs you something. Here's what I mean by that. We are all laying down our lives for something or someone. We are all spending our money to gain favor from something or someone. We're all spending our time on something or someone. We are all spending our energy on something or someone. We are all putting our hopes and dreams in something or someone. We are all finding our identity, our functional salvation in something or someone. Every human being you meet worships. The only choice we really get is what to worship and what it's going to cost. Some of us worship our career and our success. That's where we find our identity. Who are you? I am a good businessman. I'm a good businesswoman. I'm successful. What did you have to sacrifice in that? I just had to sacrifice my family. Some of us worship our kids. Like where kids are born and you're like, now I have purpose in my life. Now I have meaning in my life. And you spend your entire life promising and demonstrating to that kid that they are your God. And that crushes them and you. Some of us, we worship money. It gives you security. It just costs you your integrity, right? Worship costs you something. Biblically in the Old Testament, this is true as well. You never came to God empty-handed, right? In the Old Testament, you brought some sort, whether it be a burnt offering or praise offering or a grain offering or an olive offering or Nintendo offering. I don't know. That's confusing. Leviticus is just really thick, right? Right. But in place of you, right, you would give an animal. You say, in place of me, this is what I give. Everybody worships, and worship costs you something. Here's the question: how do you evaluate what something is worth? And here's how you do it. What something is worth to you is what you're willing to pay for it. This is how this works. So my older son is studying to be a geologist right now at Arkansas Tech. They have a good geology degree. And he takes his money, what little money he has, he takes his money and he goes into rock shops and he spends money on rocks. Because he says, these are beautiful, these are great. I'm like, I can get those in my backyard. Why would I, right? My younger son, he just bought himself, he wants to go into construction management. He just graduated, about to go to college, be in construction management. So he just spent, I won't tell you how much he spent, but he just spent the equivalent of a small minivan on a pair of boots that are custom made to his feet. He picked out all the stitching. He picked out all the stuff. I mean, I've never owned a pair of boots that come close to the cost that he just spent as an 18-year-old, right? But I work in my sandals usually. But to him, he sees beauty, right? He's willing to pay the cost. You get the principle. What something is worth to you is what you're willing to pay for. So the question becomes, what is the worth of Jesus? Wow. Here's the price: living sacrifice. The cost of worship for Jesus is you. Is you. Now, and we have to think about this because we have a problem here in America. I don't know if y'all know that. We have a couple of problems here in America. It's not here, it's elsewhere. Them, not us, them. But one of the problems that we have is that, especially in church culture, which is fine, I understand it, is we say, just walk the aisle and give your heart to Jesus, and you're cool. That's all you got to do. Walk the aisle, give your affection to Jesus. I like Ike, I like Jesus. Right? I love potatoes, I love Jesus. I don't know who loves potatoes, right? It just came out, but I love Jesus. But the issue is simply this: Jesus doesn't ask for your heart, he demands your whole self. You see, living sacrifice, Jesus wants your affection, Jesus wants your heart, Jesus wants your hopes, Jesus wants your dreams, Jesus wants your identity, Jesus wants your desires, Jesus wants your mind, Jesus wants your soul. He's like, it's all mine. All of it is mine. All of it's mine. And you may think that's a high price. All of me, that's a pretty high cost, Jesus. But Paul says, he says, this is your what? True and what? But this is the NIV. Another translation says, this is your reasonable sacrifice. Or another translation says, this is your rational act of worship. Or another translation says, this is your logical service. Or another translation says, this is your intelligent service. So for you to be a living sacrifice in view of who Jesus is your true, proper, reasonable, rational, logical, intelligent worship. Let's go back to the investment. Knowing what you know now, let's say you go back in time and you tell yourself back in time, you're saying, listen, let's just go with Microsoft. Listen, there's this if you put $10,000 down, me together in 2023 will have $90 million. And I know you don't know about the future, but that's still a decent amount of money, right? I can still buy a hamburger or two with $90 million, right? And you're sitting there with your former self, and your former self says, I hear what you're saying, but Church's Chicken has a sale right now, and I really want an 8-piece. And there is this dress at Delaire's that makes my butt look so nice, right? And I was going to get a manicure, and you would look at yourself and say, you are the dumbest person I have ever met in my, how, this is irrational, this is illogical, let's think about Jesus. Knowing what we know about Jesus, knowing what we know about the mercies of Jesus, knowing what we know about what Jesus has done for us, knowing what we know about what Jesus is doing for us, know about the rate, the ROI for Jesus in the future is just insane. And you would say, listen, if you don't give him everything, you're the dumbest person I've ever met. This is irrational. This is anti-intellectual. This makes no sense. But we all understand because, listen, investing it all in Jesus sounds really risky, right? Can we just, that's just the truth. Investing it all in Jesus sounds really risky. One of my favorite authors right now, if you haven't heard of her, you need to go at least follow her on the Insta or on Facebook or wherever she's at. Jackie Hill Perry, her husband's Preston Perry. Find Jackie Hill, she's awesome. She wrote a book called Holier Than Thou. And at the very beginning, the reason that she wrote the book Holier Than Thou is she was laying in her bed one night and she had a revelation, and that revelation started to make her write this book. So here's the revelation, because I'm telling you, we all think following Jesus this radically is risky. Let me just reason with you. Let me be rational with you. Let's talk about a little bit of logic here, okay? If God is holy, then he can't sin. Okay, we good so far? If God is who he says he is, and he is, then he can't sin. Okay. Premise number one. Premise number two. If God can't sin, then he can't sin against you. And if God can't sin against you, that makes him the most trustworthy being that there is. Jesus asks everything, but he gives no apologies for that, because what he is offering is wholeness. What he's offering is restoration. What he's offering is the things that you really want, even if you don't know they're the things that you really want. So the next question becomes what? Everybody say what? The question is this: what do we need to be able to live like this? Well, he tells us, thankfully. Paul says, in order to be a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, being your true and proper and intelligent and rational and reasonable worship, here's his instructions. Do not what? Conform to the pattern of this world, but what be? Transformed by the what? Renewing of your mind. What does that mean? Did you know that there? I've read a couple of books on finance. I didn't retain that information, but I read a couple of books on finance. Did you know that most financial people agree that there's a difference between the way poor people, middle class people, and rich people view money? Yes. Poor people see money as something to be spent. You give me $200, I spend $200. Middle class people see money as something to be saved. You give me $200, I spend $150, I put $150 away for a later day. Wealthy people see money as something to be invested. You give me $200, I make it into $600, I take that $600 and make it into $1,800, take that $1,800 and make it into Microsoft, right? They would say you have to transform your mind to transform your finances, right? Let me give you another illustration. Let's talk about segregation and racism for a second. Uncontroversial topic, right? Let's talk about, but specifically, let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr. for just a second. I'm going to ask you the same question And 2 times in a row, I'm only going to change the end of the question, and it's not a trick question. Just answer it like you know the answer is. Don't mess me up, Neil. Don't mess me up. Okay, here's the deal. Question number 1. Is what Martin Luther King Jr. stood for and preached about popular or unpopular today? It's popular, right? We have Martin Luther King Day that we all saw. We get a Monday off. I just went to Washington, D.C. I saw this giant monument that we made of Martin, like every, there's no one that doesn't like Martin Luther King Jr. Like, we're like, yeah. Okay, follow up. I'm just going to change the time. Is what Martin Luther King Jr. stood for and preached about popular or unpopular back in the 50s and 60s? Unpopular, right? You can see the result of that in history books, right? What changed between the 50s and 60s and today? Well, Martin Luther King preached a sermon a couple of times, actually. He had this one on repeat that you can go look up after the service, not right now, called Paul's Letter to the American Christians. And his contention was simply this: the American churches are conformed to the pattern of this world. They were afraid to be different. They wanted to be socially accepted, and they thought, well, everybody, look at our culture. Everybody accepts segregation. If everybody accepts segregation, how can it be wrong? And Martin Luther King would call, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He would say, see your neighbor the way that God sees them. See the horror of segregation the way that God sees the horror of segregation. Change us, transform your mind, and we can transform this world. And we're living in the midst of that transformation. You see, Martin Luther King and Paul would both say this: we need to think like Jesus so we can live like Jesus lives. We need to think like Jesus thinks so we can live like Jesus lives. Because our default, listen, I'm telling you, I'm going to encourage you at the end. Our default, promise, it's coming. Our default is that our default is conforming to this world. The question that I ask this question to my kids all the time: who's discipling you? And the reason I ask that is because I, by and large, know. But if you were to guess, I looked it up, so I have the answer, and it's very specific. But if you were to kind of guess, how much time do you think the average American spends on their smartphone looking at some form of social media a day? 5 hours and 49 minutes. That's the average. I also looked this up. Follow-up question. How much time does the average believer spend in the Scripture on an average day? 3 minutes. 6 hours, 3 minutes. I can tell you who's discipling you. I can tell you what worldview you're adopting. I can tell you what you think is right and wrong, because you are being discipled by the conglomerate of the world. Like, if you want to know what does the world mean, like that's it. And I'm telling you, we are buying into it. We need to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So, for example, we need to transform our mind about money. Jesus says, everything I'm about to say, Jesus says, you say I am rich. Our mission team just got from Cuba, and they saw poverty that America does not know. You say I am rich. Globally, historically, everybody in this room is filthy rich. I know that might be hard. Statistically, it's true. You say, I'm rich, I've acquired wealth, and I don't need a thing. But Jesus says, you don't realize that you're wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. We need to start rethinking what we think about money. Or what about our enemies, right? You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Where have we heard that? We've heard that on Fox News. We've heard that on CNN News. We've heard that on MSNBC News. We've heard that specifically on Twitter. That's the hellhole of social media, right? But this is what you're told. You're like, hey, listen, just those people that are for you, keep them close, and everybody else, they can go kiss, whatever, right? But I say to you, Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you so that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. We need to transform the way we think about families. Especially during COVID, we're like, you know what, my biological, that's all I really need. It's just, this is what I'm going to do. But when people came up to Jesus, his disciples came up to Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, your mothers and your sister and brothers are here. You want to go? And Jesus said, what? He said, here are my brother. Whoever does the will of God. Listen, if you do the will of God in this room, you're my brother. Not just, hey, brother. You're my sister. You're my mother. Listen, when my biological family has passed away and I never see them again because they did not know Jesus, you and I will spend all of eternity with one another. You are my family. Transform the way you thought. Or even the things that we concern ourselves about on a daily basis. Jesus says, do not what? Everyone say that again. Do not what? Everyone say that again. Do not what? Y'all need, because y'all need that. I need that. Maybe y'all don't. I need that. Saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? Because that's what people that don't know Jesus worry about. How much of our lives are consumed with worry? And what are we going to wear? And who are we going to meet with? And what are we going to do? Jesus says you need to transform your mind. What do we need to do? He says what you need to do is seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And what? All these things will be what? Given to you as well. Stop worrying about the things that literally everybody worries about. Stop that. If you just focus on me, I got the rest. Promise. And I'm holy. I can't sin. I can't fail you. We need to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. And the way that you can renew your mind, this is a circular passage, is by viewing God's mercies, which can be seen in the fact that Jesus sacrificed his life for you so that you can be a living sacrifice in him. You see, Jesus is the ultimate example of a living sacrifice. He says, I am the good shepherd. Then the good shepherd lays down his what? Life for his sheep. Jesus says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. And if I have the authority to lay it down, I have the authority to pick it back up again. What something is worth is what you're willing to pay for it. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave what? You are worth the life of the incarnate, eternal Son of God. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 2 says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. What's the joy set before him? You. You're the only thing he didn't have before the cross. He's the reason that he got on the cross. You. The cross is how you can know that Jesus is infinitely wise. It's how you can know that Jesus is infinitely good. It's how you can know that Jesus is infinitely beautiful. It's how you can know that Jesus is infinitely trustworthy. Jesus is the only master that won't consume you, that won't leave you, that won't forsake you, and that won't use you up till you're done. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercies, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship.